Okay, that should be much better.
Thank you.
Yeah, also for me, that would be obnoxious.
Thanks for
Yeah,
your
how are
time,
you
too.
doing? Oh, yeah, for sure.
Pretty good. I'm somewhere else than I normally am.
Oh, wow, that's a lot of books. Is that a personal library or?
I'm house sitting for a friend down in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, nice.
Have you always been in the land of Ohio?
Yeah, pretty much. I grew up in Cincinnati, and then I went to Steubenville for college. Then I went back to Cincinnati. I taught high school, and now
Oh,
I'm back in Steubenville.
okay. So did you get your master's teaching certificate or?
No, I taught theology, so you don't have to go through all the hoop jumping, which is really nice. I didn't want to do that anyway. I was originally planning on going to the Dominican House of Studies, which is a school in Washington, D.C. But then, yeah, just as things were kind of falling into place after graduation, I realized I wasn't really ready to just jump straight into like a master's going into PhD program. So I decided to pull back and teach instead. Figured that I would learn the things that I already knew better by speaking them out loud.
Mhm.
That definitely did happen, but I'm also very glad not to be teaching high school anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is there something very
I
special about high school theology?
uh well, I mean, no, I mean I don't want to be doing it. It's just I like the academic theology, and you can only go so far with high schoolers. It's really fun when they start to get it. But until that point, it can be, I don't know, just for myself, I found it a little like frustrating at times.
Because of their attitudes or trying to fit the concepts into something that they could understand?
No, no, no. They had great attitudes. I mean, my students were awesome. Like I really, really loved my students a lot. It just wasn't the right fit for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
hard to
wanted to be
quantify that.
reading other things, and I wanted to be going further, but when you're teaching, you just have to be like focused primarily on the stuff that you're teaching the students.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the spot that I wanted to be at. Yeah.
Theology, though,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's a thing.
Yeah. I mean, in Catholic schools. Yeah.
So I'm not aware of Catholic school. So what percentage of Catholic school is about theology? Is it like one out of every 8 courses or something like that? Like,
Yeah. You always have a theology course every single year.
okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even
So,
from kindergarten up, I guess you're doing Bible
yeah.
stories back then, but yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then they get deeper and more complex, abstract.
Mm-hmm. Or at least they should.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to Catholic school my entire life. So I started off with like the simple Bible stories, and yeah, if you depending on who's teaching, you can kind of stay in that space for a long time. And I think if that's people's experience of Catholic school and learning theology, and it doesn't go beyond that, then you just think, well, that's everything that theology has to offer, and it's generally pretty simplistic, and it's just a bunch of Bible stories. The end. I happened to go to a really great grade school that kind of pushed us a lot further. So that's what got me, I think, first interested in theology. Because like I just knew, well, I found out pretty quickly that it was like deeply philosophical. And I didn't even know what philosophy was. I was in fifth grade, and my teacher decided to teach our class about the idea of relativism, um, and objective truth or subjective truth. And I remember like basically going to a lecture and absolutely loving it as a fifth grader. And the rest of my classmates were bored out of their minds. But I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was awesome. So I think that was my first taste of philosophy, theology. And then, yeah, that's what I was trying to bring when I was teaching in the classroom.
So when you discovered relativism, did you find that you could just manipulate everybody to your heart's command? Like a
No.
great power that opened up to you?
No. I think I mean what was significant for me was finding that it was inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
So the this
What do you mean inconsistent with itself? Is that like
Yeah.
by definition, relativism is
Yeah.
inconsistency? It's just pointing to the inconsistency and
Relativism as kind of a philosophy of life or philosophy of religion really doesn't work. A very simple way to boil it down, I think this is kind of like the general attitude that people have is like, well, like you have your truth, I have my truth. Like what's true for me is true for me. What's true for you is true for you. So, kind of like live and let live. But then if you start scratching at the surface a little bit more, trying to dig a little bit deeper, well, what does that really mean? Then you kind of run into this situation where like there is no objective truth that you can access. There is like there is either no truth or there is no truth that you can access. And so then you run into a weird thing because relativism is kind of an assertion about that. So you're making a claim, like kind of an objective claim about an objective reality that you're claiming you can't get to. So it's like a self-contradiction.
mm-hmm. But
So
it could be read as there's no total truth. There's no way that a human being has the capacity to inhabit or be
yeah,
revealed the whole truth.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I think those are two different things. Like there is no like kind of like totalizing perspective from a human being. I mean, we're just like intrinsically limited in anything. So like we don't no individual has like a monopoly on like a vision
And that
or
that
like
could
a
be construed
system.
as a objective statement that human
Mm-hmm.
beings are not able to be completely objective.
Yeah.
So, but you can begin there. Like there is
Yeah.
a kind of a relativism in the sense of the five blind men and the elephant,
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah, I know.
where
I know.
they're all describing they can only touch so much, and so they're all kind of describing the same theme or
Mm-hmm.
thing, but it's all based on their relative position to the thing.
Yeah, I think kind of a phrase that gets thrown around here is the idea of like things are relative without being relativistic. So you can't go so far as to say that there is no reality out there that you can access or like accessing reality uh, is impossible because that would make your statement false because you are making an assertion about reality. But that's not to say that any human being has a totalizing perspective of the world. Um, yeah, because like with that image of the five blind men, like you're only coming from your angle, you can only touch so much, see so much.
Mm-hmm. And so two things following on that. Why is theology, or how does theology approach the truth? And secondly, how does Catholic theology, which assumes to have a total grasp on something or a full grasp on something?
Yeah, I mean I've been thinking about this a lot. Like what's the difference between the Christian perspective and like totalizing philosophical systems like Hegelianism? And I think that is because written within Christianity is inherently a mystery. Like no human being can have a totalizing access, but the total whole is contained within Christ. But He Himself is a mystery that I can't contain in my entirety. And so the whole orientation of Christianity is basically trying to open yourself up to the mysterious reality of who Christ is. And so I don't think it has that same kind of totalizing perspective. It's not trying to put everything into a box. So there's certain certainties that Catholicism has, like about the truth, like that Jesus Christ is the incarnate God. That is a certainty that we have, like a historical fact that we believe. But that doesn't mean that because we have like some certain knowledge that therefore like I have a totalizing knowledge of everything. Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense?
Mm-hmm. Catholicism also has a assumption about reality too, that it is discoverable or
Mm-hmm.
Faith and
Yeah.
science aren't in contradiction or conflict so much in your faith.
No, no, and I think it's because they're both operating on the same base assumptions, um, which is that the world is knowable. Like I think no matter where you are, no matter what philosophical perspective or theological perspective you're coming from, you I think it's really impossible to not move from a place of faith. Like you just have to trust that what my senses are relaying to me is something true about reality. Like you don't have an option. Otherwise, you can't really function at all in the world. And certainly science doesn't work. And so both science and Christianity have that basic faith uh, in the world that I can know it, in the senses that I can trust them. So I really think that there's no avoiding that kind of basic faith
Are
at
they
all.
are they intertwined for you? I guess discoverability and mystery, or faith and science, or
Yeah, yeah, I think
are they
so.
the same kind of knowing, or are they kind of complementary, or have a fruitful tension?
Yeah, I think because they come from the same source. I mean, there is one reality. Like reality is a whole. It's a oneness. So yeah, like if God is true, and if like the created reality is true, there's not going to be any contradiction in those things, and so there doesn't have to be a fear about uh, approaching science, or that science is going to be contradictory
Mm-hmm.
to the faith.
Let's say something like evolution, which kind of shocks our senses that we are somehow molded of the same pumice as the orangutan and the tree and the lobster. It's all kind of a whole. It was kind of offensive to the human being, who's a supremacist and an egoist, to think that why would God like not just plot me out of nowhere? How did I be formed? How is there a continuum between the ape and Christ, even?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you see that pattern in Genesis, in that original text. Um, like you see kind of a growing complexity of creation when you walk through the 7 days. And it seems that what the author is trying to communicate is that like there's kind of the phrase thrown around in theological circles is a hierarchy of being. Like you start with the most kind of like basic things, like time and space are created in the beginning, and
Mm.
then you have the stuff that fills it up, and that stuff is becoming increasingly more complex, which seems to follow some like evolutionary trends, becoming more complex. But
Mm.
then when you get to man, you have like he's being like raised in his complexity, like from the dirt, the same stuff as the rest of creation, and then meeting with spiritual reality. uh in man, heaven meets earth, and that's, I think, the difference
Hmm.
when it comes to man.
Hmm. How's that known? Is that another mystery? And what's the function of mystery? Because both you and Mark mentioned that, and other people of your ilk, in Revelation. Unless that's carefully defined, it could just be, oh, whatever
Oh
we can't
yeah.
make sense of. We're just like, it's a mystery.
Uh-huh.
It's Revelation.
Yeah, I remember being frustrated with that as a child. It's like
I want to
that's
know.
not an answer. Yeah, I think mystery is kind of what you were getting at with like there's no way that any human person can have a totalizing vision. I think a mystery is something that you can know, but you can never know in its entirety because it's inexhaustible. Like that
Okay.
meaning cannot be like explicated fully.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always going to be more and greater depths, and that's why the human person would be a mystery. I mean, there's certain like certainties I can have about you in this conversation. I can be really confident, but the mystery of who you are is like complex and deep, and I don't think that's exhaustible, especially as time is unfolding and as you yourself are unfolding in time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't I can't put you in a totalizing box, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the one problem with a lot of the ideologies that one comes across in the world is that they, insofar as they are totalizing, they strip people of the capacity to be humble.
Mm-hmm.
And then things that would be processed beneficially for the person are processed negatively. They become resentful. They become even more greedy for power because they don't have some sort of trust in the mystery or some sort
Yeah.
of boundary to their own will. And some certain ideologies strip man of that boundary or trick him into thinking that boundary isn't
Yeah.
there.
Oh, exactly. I think in general there is a human trend towards totalizing because we want to be able to control everything.
Hmm.
Um, and so like you see that in philosophical trends, you see that in political trends. I mean, you can see that in the gender ideology that's happening now. Like I want to like kind of control my identity and who I am. Um, yeah, I think that's always a human tendency. So you need a real check on that. And I do think in Christianity, you are given an actual like check from like your kind of totalizing grasp, like your movement to try to essentially be God, to see everything, to know everything, to plan everything according to your will, because you recognize that creation and your limits are given to you, um, and that it's a gift. And I think that is gift and mystery go hand in hand, because when my limits are a gift and it's also not something I can fully understand, then I am forced into a position of humility to be able to receive that gift and kind of work with it and watch it unfold.
Mm-hmm. Be a steward of reality or a tender and a
Mm-hmm.
tender to reality.
Yeah, I like the image of Adam in the beginning as a gardener, because I think that that really encapsulates the role that we're supposed to be having with reality. Like I'm not the one who's like creating how things function, but I'm paying attention to the reality as it's being given and then like helping to give it more shape. Like I recognize the thing with its particular potentialities, its particular limits, and so I move things in the world to allow it to flourish. I mean, that is what a gardener does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, are you working on something? You and Mark finished the first season of Politics of Gender.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. How many episodes was that? 20?
Oh, I
80?
don't know.
13?
It was longer than I expected.
It was pretty long. It was very involved.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I've watched most all of it. I'm finishing up, I think, the last episode, not the live stream Q&A that you guys did, but the one before that. And there's a lot of really good parts to that. But you got kind of attached to that project. How did you get into that project?
Yeah.
And is that a
So
part of a bigger project that you're concerned with?
so I guess the project began with Mark's dissertation. Mark was working on a dissertation on gender.
Do you recall the title?
Mm,
No.
oh, not at
Barnes
all.
on Gender. No, okay.
Probably
Yeah.
something just as exciting. uh, yeah, I knew that he was working on that. And so when I was reaching out to New Polity, because I offered to help for free, and then it turned into not for free, which
Oh,
is even
nice.
better.
Great. Yeah.
um, yeah, I knew he was working on that, and I knew that he was reading queer theory, Judith Butler in particular. So I was reading that on my own with some friends of mine because I just wanted to understand it. And then
Was that your
what?
first foray into postmodern thought through the gender lens? Or
Uh,
is that related to other
no.
philosophical explorations that you were embarking on?
Um, I think my introduction to postmodernism came from my senior year of college. Um, so kind of like uh, Nietzsche onwards. I was in a great books program, so we were just kind of reading systematically important works throughout the centuries. And so that was really my first taste of it. And then I think I also became even more interested in it when I started following Jonathan Peugeot in the Symbolic World, because he's definitely a postmodern thinker, but an Orthodox Christian, which was just an awesome combination. So then I got really excited.
Hold on. We have to pause there because there are a couple of my followers who loathe postmodernism to no end, and they can't understand how I would possibly be postmodernist, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty postmodernist. So how is that not like the most deadliest upending of everything that we can know and do as human beings? How is that fruitful? And does it need to be combined with something else like orthodoxy or creativity in order to...
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think postmodernism on its own just leads to despair. So to kind of go back to the like kind of overly simplistic relativism view, like there is no truth. I mean, that I think is a contradiction, but I think there's just a skeptical position, which is what postmodernism takes up, that the access to like an objective reality is just really impossible at all. And yeah, the overconfidence that we had from the Enlightenment and our rationalities just kind of come crashing down. What I find exciting about this is because it reveals that totalizing systems don't work. It reveals that you can't enter into rationality except through a kind of faith in something. So even for the postmodern who recognizes that I can't have full access on reality, you just have to assume some things. And I think that's really helpful and kind of breaking the Enlightenment paradigm that we can just kind of think our way through anything and have perfect rationality. And yeah, without something kind of grounding you, then I think that can lead into total despair. Like I can't know things as they are, so all that's left in the world is power and for me to manipulate it. But I think if you are Christian and you're taking postmodernism seriously, then you start to realize like even more your dependence on God and your need to submit to the mystery.
And it's fun.
Yeah.
It's a tool. It's a toolkit of interpretation, and it devolves into a single interpretation, a power interpretation, a cynical interpretation. Given that the wielder of these tools or this pattern of interpretation has nothing else to stand on, has no connection to reality or faith in a connection to reality that might lead to a connection to reality at some point, like a faith in God. Is an assumption, but until you have the connection or communion with God, then it's still just a blank assumption. But you at least can carve out some sort of humility and gratitude maybe for the gifts that you're given, and that then builds up to some sort of joy or non-cynicism in life. And so postmodernism, knowing that there's these narratives that are crashing around and bungling around, can be approached just like a garden. Like, okay, well, let's see what can be developed here. Let's see what has been developed here. Let's see what I can engage with and cultivate. But if you don't have, I think that if you are too proudful or too in your head, then you kind of get disconnected. You don't even have that opening for the connection to be fostered. And then it kind of goes into very cynical games. So postmodernism is, as a stance, is kind of value neutral. It really does depend on the assumptions or that someone either starts with or comes to in practicing it.
Yeah, and the other thing that I like about it too is that it's kind of a return of narrative and meaning. Like you can't actually encounter the world without like kind of imposing some kind of meaning on it. And again, like you can take a cynical turn, like I am imposing meaning on the world, therefore meaning is coming from me and there is no objective. I really don't like the word objective, but I keep using it. But there is no meaning out in the world, and it's just kind of like a power move that I'm inflicting on the things out there.
Mm-hmm.
Or kind of the another flip would be realizing that like what it means to be human is to be an inherently narrative being, is to be within story, to be within meaning, such that it's really impossible for me to escape it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that really exciting.
Is that one way to understand the difference between theology and philosophy, like a different relation to narrative or interpreting things according to a narrative framework? Because theology just seems more storied to me than philosophy, even though philosophy does have a rich tradition of parables and etc. and metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of see it gets a little bit confusing for me to think about or talk about because I just see them as overlapping so much.
Okay. All right.
Like I feel like you kind of do both simultaneously always, but it's sometimes more one or the other.
Even secular of like Judith Butler is still doing theology on some level, or even an analytic philosopher.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because um, yeah, she's asserting an anthropology, and she's asserting like a narrative, a story, like kind of a myth of humanity,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. And I mean, that's precisely what the Bible is doing. I just don't think that you can escape those narrative myths of our origin stories. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, if you're, yeah, I just think it's impossible to escape. Um, and I think she recognizes that too, like that she can't escape like asserting a narrative, a kind of myth about the human person,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what that means. And hers is a very cynical one.
Oh, and lyrical too, if one was to gauge her writing style. Very, very abundant, rich. So you've always been
Yes.
in the Christian story then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did you know that you fit in it?
Uh,
Some people don't. Some people have to rebel, maybe.
yeah, I think that's a part of some people's stories. I think for me, I guess my experience, uh, I've always I've always wanted to understand things, and I've always wanted things to be practical. And so that's kind of the way that I approached faith when I was learning it. And I happened to have been in a situation where I was able to see both of those very, very young. And I don't think everyone has that experience. So as far as like understanding things like that, fifth grade experience talking about relativism or really philosophy. I mean, it was like a fifth grade like little lecture. Like obviously it's not going to be that comprehensive. Like there's lots of holes that you could poke in it. But I realized that, uh, yeah, that like logic and faith do in fact go hand in hand. And if it doesn't, that's a problem.
Hmm.
And then I think on the other hand, I was looking for, yeah, practicality. Like if this thing is true, then it'll actually bear fruit in my life. And so it wasn't like I didn't go through like a specific like investigation. It was like as I was working it out and as I was living it, I was just kind of like testing, testing, testing. Like, is this true? And I kept finding that the more questions I was asking, like I was actually getting satisfying answers. And then when I was going to prayer, that it was actually bearing fruit in my life. I was becoming a more peaceful person, a more charitable person. Like the things that are supposed to be the fruit of prayer was happening to me. And so, like as a young person, it's like, well, like this is working.
Hmm.
And then I think kind of in high school and college, you just kind of like shot off the deep end. I was like, oh, wow, this is actually really fascinating. Now I want to know everything.
Hmm. It's a big wheelhouse, that Catholic faith. I mean, what you guys got? You're going on like 2040 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Celebration. You're always celebrating something.
It's true. Today's the feast of John the Baptist, so happy feast
Oh,
day.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'll go out and get some locusts from my local honey and locust store.
Gross.
What are
Man,
you
now I have
talking
to do
about?
that too.
That's what the WEF wants us to do. Full circle. We'll eat
Yeah,
bugs and be happy.
yeah, I feel like Catholicism is kind of like the door into Narnia. You're like, this is going to be like this simplistic thing with like your rules, and this is like your like religion stuff. And then you open up the wardrobe, you walk in, you're like, oh my gosh, like there's a whole world here, and I will never be able to explore it all. It's going to take away too much time. And that's kind of the fruit of having a very, very long tradition.
Yeah, yeah. Among one of several fruits of having being connected to such a long tradition. One thing that I grew up evangelical, Protestant Christian. There's like a wooden cross in front of the chapel, really no adornments. Every once in a while, maybe there's a stained glass window with some sort of nice geometric pattern, but there was no real deep iconography or even a very deep sense of visual art itself. So when I started to visit Europe and then go into these cathedrals and stuff, and I was confronted by, well, one, the tradition and the feeling of these spaces that are just linked to thousands of years of devotion. I could just feel that in the room. But one thing that moved me was Mary. These sculptures and these paintings of Mary and her relationship to Christ, and trying to figure out, like, why is Mary here? What is going on with that? And I was a few years ago, I was in France and kind of just wandering around, and I found a monkery. What are they called? Where the monks
Monastery?
go? Monastery.
Yeah.
I stayed there for a few days, and it turned out that there was this guy from Kentucky there.
Cool.
So he would chat with me, and we'd go and walk around, and he'd show me the rabbits that they eat and other things. And I asked, well, why Mary? Why is this icon here? Why is it I keep on finding it inside of these buildings that you guys have built and that you live in? And he said that, I can't remember his exact answer, but something about the reflection of Christ's pain in the mother is even a higher realization of that pain, or like the witnessing stance of Mary to the divine gift in the Son, and then the divine sacrifice and Jesus' crucifixion is almost stronger or more potent in some way, but I don't know. It's a mystery. But the question is, or the topic is, like, the place for the feminine and the female in Catholicism is not hidden. It's out front. No. it's front, and it's actually center. And if you really look at it, you start to see that actually every time you go into a cathedral, you're inside of a woman, and the church is kind of like this. I don't know how Pajoian we need to go, but like you can kind of see that the female represents huge things and very specific things. It's all in there. So I'm just wondering about that and your relationship to that, and how that has grown in you and informed you.
I think when it comes to Mary, I think it makes sense to understand the church as being the bride of Christ. And Mary is kind of an image of the church in a way. Like, she's like the perfect woman, the one who is perfectly receptive to God, and not in a way that, like, Mary, I don't know, like, wasn't human. But she was completely receptive to God, to the point of like totally receiving God into herself and bearing God into the world. And that is basically the role of the church, and kind of the role that what we're supposed to be before God is this image of total receptivity to God. So I guess to kind of bring it full circle to some of the other things that we were talking about is yeah, to like humble yourself before the mystery, before your own limits, before God, and to receive him so that you can like bear fruit and bear life, and bring that to the world and to other people. Yeah, and I think that the feminine is a particularly potent symbol of that. Is kind of almost like the highest symbol. It's kind of the spiritual orientation of the church is essentially to be Mary. So then it makes sense that Mary is just everywhere, constantly reminding you like this is your position before God.
It's very profound, and there's certain mysteries that you can't really convince anybody of through argument. Either they speak to you, or they resonate with you, or they don't. And I guess that's either my humility speaking or my aesthetic sense of, there's no arguing taste.
Yeah.
But in investigating feminism, because I've been investigating gender, and if you're going to investigate gender, you're going to invest masculinity and femininity. And I'm more oriented towards investigating femininity and the feminine and the female and the woman because I'm a man, and so it's kind of just more interesting to me to go in that direction. Plus, there's something. I dip into the manosphere every once in a while and stuff, but there's just something like kind of gay with a JHEY kind of thing about it. It's like, I don't know, we're getting a little too broy. So I need more work in that area. But I notice in American feminism, or in feminism in general, but American feminism, and there are many feminisms, and there's, different strains of it. And there's even Catholic forms of feminists that are coming into being. Erica Bakiloki and Abigail Favell. There's a lot of Catholic women specifically who are actually pointing to something that is assuming or subsuming feminist critique and then bringing it back to the church, bringing it back to a complementary relationship to the male and female. But anyway, so there's American feminists, and they're kind of liberal, and they don't like it when you say that to be feminine is to be receptive. Like that's negative power. That's negative power. And it might be negative power, but I don't think it's any less powerful than negative power. So I'm just wondering, like, have you been persuaded to think of the woman as being put down by being shown as passive or receptive? Or how do you square that with the critique of maybe women being taken advantage of by being taught this stuff, being put into a place?
Yeah, no, I definitely grappled with that. I think more in high school and going into college, more intellectually, honestly. I just wanted to understand. I went to an all-girls school. So Cincinnati's kind of an odd place. There's a ton of Catholic schools. It's overflowing. Ton of all-boys schools, ton of all-girls schools. So I was kind of... because of the all-girls school environment, I was kind of in like a feminist environment. The thing that we would say over and over and over again was, "We are empowered young women." I'm sick of that phrase. I'm done.
Do you know what it means or what it meant?
I mean, for us, it was just like girl power, hooray! We need something for marketing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just my cynicism speaking.
Well, it's that the visual representation would be, sorry to go Marvel, but in Avengers Endgame, there was this gratuitous scene of all of a sudden all the female characters in the entire series just kind of appeared on screen, and they did this girl power, like this 30-second slow motion girl power, like goddess march. It was just like totally egregious. But anyways,
oh no. Yeah, I think I experienced that kind of vibe in general from my school, and it kind of felt like people were compensating for something, and that's kind of how I felt with feminism. Like, if you really have to assert that like women are powerful, women are powerful, women are powerful. It's like, well, if we are, we shouldn't have to convince anyone, you know? Like it just should just be evident. And I shouldn't have to like, I guess, kind of like fight for it. And I think it's because feminism is being colored by masculinity. Like it's this idea that the only kind of power that's a real power is the kind that can be seen, that's external, or that is violent.
Quantitative,
And
yeah.
and men like do have a monopoly on that. Like, I mean, men tend to be stronger. Men like tend to be, I don't know, more like active politically and just interested in doing the things that are associated with those kinds of power. And so, yeah, so this turn then of saying, well, like, well, women are also powerful. Therefore, it means that they have to express power in the exact same way that men do. That's kind of what I was picking up on, and I was getting frustrated.
Oh, so you had an intuitive sense that there was something off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it just didn't really make sense to me. And I was interested in kind of what the church was saying about like the feminine spirit. So I don't know if you've heard of something called Theology of the Body.
I don't know.
Okay. New stuff then. So Pope John Paul II. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he developed this in his Wednesday audiences. I think it was originally a text that he wrote, and then he just presented little portions of it week by week, and kind of really drawing out. Really, I think what Theology of the Body was about was the symbolism or language of the body. So this idea that the human person is infused with meaning from the beginning, including our bodies. And so it's not just that I'm limited by my body, but I have these limits so that I can speak something. I mean, you can think of language. Like if I want to actually communicate things, then I have to submit myself to the rules of grammar. And it's in submitting myself to those limits and those rules of grammar that I can actually express truth and move beyond just the rules into just this free poetic creativity. And so that was kind of his vision of the human person and of the body and what it meant to be man and woman. And so, yeah, the limits of our bodies is so that we can communicate essentially eternal truths. Like you communicate something about God, about our life with God. And I mean, you see kind of in scripture, again, going back to that idea of the church being the bride of Christ, you see Paul picking up on this idea that the way that human beings were created to relate to one another was intentional so that we could learn what it means to relate to God. I mean, it's not a one-to-one analogy. You certainly don't want to go there, but everything about creation is supposed to speak and help to teach us how to approach God. So by being myself, essentially, and submitting to the limits of my own body and learning to be like creative from within that, to like really to be myself would be to be feminine. And so that's kind of the angle that I was starting to look at things, because I was in my school, which kind of had like this like empowered young woman, like feminist attitude. And I was also learning about theology of the body on my own time and just picking up a very different attitude about what it meant to be a woman. And I was trying to reconcile those two things. And especially when I got into college, and studying philosophy, then it just kind of deepened that reflection a lot.
Mm-hmm. And so I could see how one could misinterpret the prompt to, let's just say that your Pope, dude, is like, women be feminine. That's how you get close to God. And then I could see that it would be, men be masculine, women be feminine, that especially what we're witnessing now with so-called gender ideologies, that people are making an idol out of the feminine and an idol out of the masculine. How do you know that you're just to be feminine? What is your relationship to femininity then?
Relationship to femininity from Like what perspective?
If this is your vehicle to manifest a relationship to God or to discover how to relate to God, how do you relate yourself to femininity in such a way that you're not taking it too seriously or too lightly? How do you recognize it? How do you even see? This is the problem with gender. How do we even see what it is? I don't even think we can really
Oh,
see it. It's something in the corner of our eye. It's something in the
yeah.
when somebody will turn their wrist or something like that. It's very light. So
Yeah, I'm grateful that you phrased it like that because that became my big question. Because I am a woman, therefore I am feminine. And what does that mean? It can get really confusing because in general, men and women can do the exact same things, but the way that we do them is different. Like it's almost like a tone or a musical quality to it. Like you can't really put your finger on it. And like there's certain things that are exclusive to women. There's certain things that are exclusive to men. Um, yeah, but for the most part, there's so much overlap. That was that was my question. And I have been thinking a lot about symbolism, and I think it makes sense that John Paul II focuses on the language of the body because language is essentially symbolism. Um, I like that idea because it keeps you from moving to a totalizing sphere. Like a symbol or language has limits. It really does express something, but it's not like that meaning is exhaustible. So like there is meaning to woman. There is kind of a limit on her, but it's not like you can like put what femininity is entirely in a box. Like I just don't think that you can totally grasp it or like I don't know, like draw a circle around the whole of it and like, all right, this is it.
or even codify it if you wanted to go that far. Totalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I don't think maybe a poet would do. I don't think there's any philosopher that's been crazy enough to try. And one funny thing about philosophers, male philosophers, they'll figure out the world, and then their wife will cheat on them, and they won't know how to deal with it. Right? There was something that popped up with Heidegger. It's like trying to like deal with his wife cheating on him. Is like, you know. So
Yeah.
there's something about a woman that breaks men's brains. Like they can't really define it. And woman has
Yep.
so much power over them at the same time that they kind of try to even cut her out in certain respects in their
Mm-hmm.
philosophies. I just see that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And that was kind of one of the things I was hoping to talk about today because I know Mark mentioned when he was on the podcast that I want to be a nun. I want to join a cloister.
You do.
Um, yeah.
What do you mean
Uh,
want?
it hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
um, yeah, I'm going to go visit a cloister in September for a month and just go try it out. So maybe I should back it up because I know that a lot of people don't know like, kind of how this works, like being a nun. um, yeah, so in the church, there's a lot of different religious orders. Like I think when people think like nun or monk, you just think of like, oh, like there's just like the one thing and they wear like a habit and it's probably brown.
Yeah. Or
And
they
I'll
either make wine or beer.
yeah.
Like in a monk. Yeah.
Really good wine and beer too. uh yeah, there's a lot of different kinds. And there's a major distinction between the different kinds. There's the actives and there's the contemplatives. And it's you can kind of think of it as like the kind of job that they do. So the active like friars, the active sisters, they're going to be the ones kind of like Mother Teresa. They're out on the streets, they're doing things like you see them essentially. So they're serving the poor, or maybe the order that you join, their job is teaching, and that's what they do. Or maybe they work in nursing homes, or maybe you do like all of the things. It depends on the order that you join, what kind of like job or apostolate vocation you're being called to, the way that you're serving other people and serving the church. So those are the actives. The contemplatives are cloistered, typically. So it means that they take a vow of stability. So the community that they enter into, that space, like the actual living place, they don't leave. So you're kind of
Ever.
like behind.
Or they get moved
Yeah,
around, right?
you can. It depends on how strict the order is. Like there's like kind of like hierarchies within the contemplatives. Um, I'm sure like people have heard of the monks who take vows of silence. I feel like everyone is aware that there's those extremes that exist. So those orders are out there. Most contemplatives, I don't think, take vows of silence. But yeah, you make a vow to like that place being your home, essentially. Um, and your vocation or job is basically just to seek God in prayer. That's it. Um, and I think that can be very confusing for people because it's not really like a useful thing. Like the active sisters, the Mothers Teresa's, they make sense. So like they're going out and serving people. But then here's these people who leave the world, they enter into the cloister, they stay behind these walls. No one else is able to enter in from the outside. They don't leave. And what they do is just pray. They just seek God. Um, and I was aware that there was that distinction, those two different kinds when I started looking at religious life. Um, and I always thought that I was going to be active. I thought I was going to be out teaching, and then I was teaching. I realized I didn't like it, and then it was kind of through that eventually I realized, oh crap, I want to be a contemplative. I want to be a cloistered nun. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I was shocked to discover that, but I don't think I should have been in the end.
How does one discover that? How did you discover that? How do you know that?
Um, yeah, I have always had an attraction to consecrated life. Um, I've always been like I grew up around religious sisters essentially, and so it always kind of been there in the back of my mind as like an option. And really, what interested me about them was that they were just so happy, and they just seemed really full of life. And like my child logic was like, I want to be happy and have fun. These people are happy and having a lot of fun. I want to be one of those. And so, yeah, I started praying and I started asking God to call me to that way of life. And then the order in particular that I was attracted to, I just never felt like an interior like push or like movement to that. So then I stopped looking in that direction, and just did other things until kind of eventually in my prayer life that desire came back again. This was kind of halfway through college. Like, okay, I need to look back into this like latent desire that was there. And I think really for me, the desire that was there the whole time was a desire to be totally dedicated to God, just completely. Um, the moments where I felt most alive and most myself were always in prayer, and especially like prayer in community, like with other people, which is what a lot of the life of a nun is doing. Um, yeah, and then the move to contemplative life. Um, yeah, I was talking to someone else actually on the phone, who was about to enter a cloister, and I was asking her why it was that she didn't join an active order and join a contemplative order instead. And it was basically that she just needed more time in prayer, and it was in that conversation like I could almost feel something in my heart change, and I realized that I deeply, deeply wanted that. I just wanted more prayer, more intimacy with God in my life. Um, and so then I knew that I had to start looking. and start doing something about that. Like, I mean, really, I think discerning that is just paying attention to your desires. That was a long way to say that. You just pay attention to your desires. That's it. I found that was there. And so then I started visiting different cloisters.
My throat dried out really intensely. Yeah, I was listening to Pints with Acquaintus. He's a YouTube sensation. And he has had, I've only watched one. No. I watched a couple of his Byzantine interviews, and I think both of the men that he interviewed went celibate. But I think one actually got married, and I don't think Catholics get divorced, so I'm pretty sure he's not celibate. I don't think I don't know. I didn't get to the end of that one, but one
Byzantine
definitely
priests,
did.
Byzantine priests can be married, yeah.
Yeah, but they can also not be married. Well, the one that I listened to the whole thing is, I can't remember the dude's name, father's name. He just described a process of wanting to devote himself entirely to God, and that he did the calculus and he got his signs and he went that way. It seems like a one-way street. I know there's The Sound of Music, and that was like another way that you can go. Like if you're fleeing the Nazis, then it's okay to get hitched, I guess, like there's some extenuating circumstances. But I mean, maybe you don't look at it like sacrifice as a sacrifice, but it is. It's a big calculus.
Yeah, I'm aware.
And it's a serious commitment too.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's so boggling to so many normies.
Yeah, I forget how weird it sounds to other people, because it feels so normal to me. Yeah, I mean, it's been a part of my life for so long. Like, you think about these things for so long, you're like, of course these are the kinds of things in everyone else's heads. No, they're not. I mean, I think like the payoff is worth it, which is, everyone wants to experience themselves being fully alive. And I think you can only really do that well if you are being attentive to your desires and not like muffling that. And from a Catholic perspective, like you do stifle your desires actually in a life of sin. Like you make the truest and deeper things about you harder to hear. I think all of us really, like, we know what that means. Like experiences of just like trying to like avoid the real things that are inside of us by like distracting ourselves with, I don't know, like food or sex or whatever. And so if you're being attentive and just kind of paying attention to the signs, taking one step at a time, because that's usually how God works. He doesn't lay out your life plan. He just says, all right, next one. Yeah, that's kind of the path to becoming fully alive. And so that's basically what I've done. Okay, this seems to be the next direction. So I take this step and then like I test it. Is it really like bringing out the fullness of who I am? And I can feel that. I know that. And what I have discovered is that the things that make me most myself and most alive is what nuns do all day. So like prayer, community, communal prayer, singing, study. The order that I'm looking into, they really care about study. So like studying theology, studying philosophy. I mean, that's really how I've come to know and love God deeper. And I know not everyone is like really like moved by like, I don't know, academics in the same way, but that's been my route to God. And so it's been obvious that I'm really supposed to lean into that.
So one thing that is a mystery to me is that if you're studying, are you product oriented, or is that not something that you're oriented to? Do you have like a project that you're working on? Maybe that's just me. I'm just project oriented. I'm creating something. I'm doing this for something. This is for something. Is that salient to you, or is it something
Um,
You're just in communion or conversation with this body of work and these conversations.
you mean like right now, or like the orientation of the monastery?
I
Both.
guess right now, one of our earlier questions, and I like our conversation because we're just kind of really kind of going through these things. One of the things is like, how did you get into this gender thing? How did you,
Yeah.
is that part of your work? I just think of people as working on something at some point. So I'm just wondering, like, is that, like, you going to write a book or, are you going to write a book? You going to do a podcast from your nunnery?
uh, no.
Cloister cast.
Oh, that'd be interesting. I wouldn't want to do that.
No, it's probably
uh,
violating some sort of law.
yeah, it wouldn't work for this monastery, maybe for others. Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing at New Polity is, I mean, it's kind of like an in-between step. I'm not in the cloister yet. And it's kind of like dating. Like you just have to go and like try it out,
Mm-hmm.
see if it fits, because you might be called to religious life, but it might not be the community for you. So it might take a while for me to find the right spot, which is fine. But in the meantime, I don't know, it seemed like there was something else that I was supposed to be working on as I'm kind of moving my way towards the monastery, trying to find my place there. And it just kind of happened that the gender stuff occurred. I mean, I was interested in Butler. I reached out to Mark. I was like, how can I help you? Like, I can help research stuff for your dissertation. By the time I got here, he had pretty much finished it. So I was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's going to be, yeah, like turning that into a book as well as like other things. So assisting in that. I'm also helping Dr. Andrew Willard Jones in a book as well. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really been my main project, actually, even though people just see me
What's
talking
that
about
book about?
gender. It's on Catholic social teaching. Um,
Oh, you guys are commies then. I kept wondering.
I'm really excited about it. It's
What is Catholic
um,
social teaching?
Catholic social teaching. Uh, it's it's kind of like human anthropology, like what is true about the human person, and because the human person is a social being, what does that mean? So it's essentially political theology. That's what it is.
Hmm.
Which I think to a lot of people sounds like an oxymoron. But if you think about politics in a broad sense, it's politics is really just about ordering power,
Yeah.
and ordering power for the common good. And that's really the heart of Catholic social teaching. That all power ought to be used for the common good. The powerful ought to use their power to raise up the weak. And for the church, the family is really the paradigm of that. And so
Hmm.
you look at how power is being manifested in a family. Like you have parents who kind of have like total power over their children. But unlike the postmodern kind of cynical take that like power tends to be just like violent imposition,
Yeah.
you can flip that and say, okay, yeah, there's the possibility of violent imposition, but if there wasn't this kind of giant power differential, then there wouldn't be the possibility of gift and fathers and mothers raising up their
Yeah.
children. And so it's essentially just looking at basic political principles without telling people exactly what they have to do.
Hmm.
So like you can use those basic principles, like all power ought to be used like to raise up the weak, like in a family, but it doesn't mean that all families are going to live that exactly the same. So it's kind of like a hands-off political theology. Like here's the basic principles. It's almost like teaching someone how to be an architect. Like here's just how nature works. Here's physics. Now go do something beautiful.
Yeah, the interesting thing about power is that we kind of are blind to it having a content. It can have a content. Power can be love. The
Yeah.
content of power can be love. And it
Mm-hmm.
can be, the content of power can be love, not only within the family, but within the city state. It can be
Mm-hmm.
that way.
Yeah.
Maybe it's really difficult for it to be that way.
Definitely.
Almost impossible sometimes, but there's that possibility. So even just shedding light on that, I'm just trying to extrapolate what could be a hands-off political theory. Say, well, this is how it works. It could work like this. There could be content in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the church is asserting is that, like that is like the true force of power. That the true force of power is love, and this is kind of like the fundamental structure, and that when we see power being manifested as like impositions of violence, not as in like is in violence in the sense of like kind of destroying something and keeping it from flourishing, I guess.
Hampering its possibility in some way. Well, for your own gain, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of stumbling around, but I think the point is that the fundamental orientation of power and the fundamental orientation of the human person is love. And so if that's kind of our baseline assumption, that's going to change the way that you interact with other people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a part of it. So the book that we're working on is taking his class on Catholic social teaching and turning it into a book. And so it's just going through like basic principles and how the church understands those things. So like, what is power? There's a whole chapter on power. What is hierarchy? Because like human beings find themselves just in hierarchy. Some people have more power than other people. Is this always a bad thing? Should we always be cynical about it? Should we arrange our political structures assuming cynicism, that power is only manifested in domination and violence?
Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Is that an absolute statement or not?
Yeah, so that's kind of what the book is about, and that's the project that I'm working on while I'm trying to get to the monastery.
Yeah, on your way to the monastery.
Yeah.
You do your own calculus for it. I don't mean to be judgmental at all. I'm just trying to like find the right questions for this. But if you abstract yourself from the world and cloister yourself off, are you not fulfilling your destiny as a woman? I'm sorry to go here. It's just a question.
Go for it.
Of having children, if that is a sacred part of being a woman, having a family, engaging with a man over your lifespan, like there's something else that you're being called to do. Like that's a huge sacrifice or absence. And I wonder if there's a calculus in that, and I know your tradition is thousands, hundreds, centuries old, depending on the cloister and the tradition, but still I'm sure that they've figured out how to square that circle, but it seems like a big circle to square.
Yeah. I think what like motherhood, like physical motherhood does is like I think that's a manifestation of what it means to be a woman fundamentally. But I think that orientation is really beyond just the physical, and is a movement into the spiritual. So what I mean is a nun is a mother. She does what mothers do, except she receives from God, who is her spouse. She receives his word, kind of, again, imitating Mary. And in receiving that word, she's bearing fruit in her prayer, and in her pursuit of God and her pursuit of virtue, and that just kind of naturally bears fruit and spiritual blessings on other people. Does that kind of make sense? Like it's the same pattern, like you're doing the same thing, but in a different way. I know that's something that Mark and I kind of talked a little bit on the podcast, that in the Catholic tradition, I think there's a more full vision of femininity because of the understanding that there's a place for celibate nuns in the church. Because if your only possibility of vocation is being a wife and mother, then it puts a cap on like your meaning as a woman. Like there's a tendency to just limit yourself to like, well, like I'm just here to like have children and raise babies. And I think that's kind of what feminism was rebelling against, right? Like I'm like this kind of intrinsic like notion that I'm made for something more than that, and that my meaning transcends just having babies. Um, and if you are in like a world in which there are like celibate nuns, and they're kind of actually, from the church's perspective, like the highest expression of femininity, because they're almost like the most embodied symbol of what union with God is going to be like. Then that kind of changes like your orientation of how you view yourself. Like automatically you have a world that's opened above you instead of just like closed to like just like the physical realm.
I wonder if that is subconsciously or unconsciously mirrored in academic feminism, as they are the nuns. Those academic feminists are basically, a lot of the rhetoric is kind of anti-male and even separatist. It's like the cloistered. It's just like there's an added bit of lesbianism in there that, whatever. But just like if that's the paragon of the feminist, that's the nunnery of the academy. That's the nunnery in a way. It just there might be some sort of parallel there.
I mean, like I can see the overlap, but it's also, it seems to me, a more sterile orientation. Like there's fundamental like orientation towards life. Like what I am meant to do is to receive and bear fruit.
Okay.
And
because I've seen this is a controversial observation, but a lot of the problems in woke college spheres, you see a lot of women without children causing these different identity groups to be their children, right? Like kind of the cat mom who like latches onto Black Lives Matter, or like find something to then coddle. It's kind of there's a manifestation of motherhood and motherliness. It just doesn't seem to be fully recognized in its full glory to serve something greater. And so there's something kind of devouring motherish about it, or coddling about it, that actually is kind of corrupting to that which it condescends to.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because I think there is that natural orientation in all women. And it's going to manifest in some capacity, or if it's not, kind of causing like an interior dissonance, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think you're right in pointing out, it is kind of manifesting in these kind of weird areas. I mean, like you see it too with kind of like, it's the same idea of like, we have like these intrinsic kind of religious movements, like a movement towards ritual, and how we're seeing kind of ritual come back into the public sphere, like public apologies. I mean, like that is like a public ritual. It's like a public confession, like all the things that the Catholic Church have been doing. It's like now everyone's
let
caught
alone
up.
all the identities. You guys, we've I've been thinking about this for a long time now. It's like we're reinventing the Catholic calendar, but it's all about identity now.
Oh my gosh, I know.
And we have Pride
it's so
Month.
weird.
Like,
it's a whole month too.
That keeps on going and going and going.
Yeah, and there's like parades, and it's just the return of ritual. But yeah, I think that's totally true about femininity. And I wonder if that has to do with a misunderstanding of power, like just reducing power to the way that we see it typically manifested in men, because if you don't think that the power of like love or perhaps intimate influence is like a real and valuable kind of power, if that's the way that you are able to, if that's the kind of power that you have, but you have been told that like that's not real power, and then you've like rejected it, you're still going to be kind of reaching for that, but in other ways.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I do think that being a nun, or just the fact that there are nuns in general, does kind of help to break that paradigm of seeing like external power as being like the ultimate like aspiration.
The paradigm of power. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things, kind of like a phrase that's tossed around in religious circles, is the active is oriented towards the contemplative. Like the purpose of your life is to know and love God. And so we put a lot of emphasis on all the external things, but really, if they're being properly ordered, they should be ordering you to the contemplative, to the place where you can know and love God intimately. Like the final kind of orientation of human existence, I think, is not to like complete a project, but to know a person. And I think the bridal imagery really helps you to, reorient the way that you're seeing that. I know I'm just kind of like asserting things,
That
but
was
I
a
don't know
good
how
one.
else to explain.
You did a judo move on me. What did you just say? The ultimate orientation of person is not to complete a project,
but to know
a person. Yeah. Is that a Maria original?
Yes, it is.
Good one. You hit home there.
Yeah, and that's why I love telling people that I want to be a nun and just watching the confusion on their faces. Because I know it's so confusing, and it's just kind of fun to watch. Yeah, like people try to process that, because I think we are so focused on being useful, being active, doing something, creating some output. Like the thing that you're asked is well, like, how do you want to make a difference in the world someday? And I think that's really admirable. But I think what woman reveals in general, and especially, I mean, like the nun is just like a symbol, like turned up to the nth degree. Like it's making it really, really clear that the ultimate orientation is really not to be just like this useful person who's doing all these great things. I mean, we all know that those things will be forgotten anyway, that they don't last. So I think that's kind of the church's response to feminism, because I think that female power is kind of a hidden power. Like the power of love and the power of influence, like intimate influence, is in fact more powerful and more long-lasting, I think, than violent power, because like you are able to enter into like the heart and the mind of the person. Like conversion, like real conversion, is going to make lasting changes in a way that an external law is not going to do. I mean, like anyone knows this when you're disciplining children. Like what's really going to make a difference is when like the kid finally gets it, and not just like when he knows that he's going to be sent to his room. So if you're really convinced that like that kind of like hidden power like is a real power, and then the church is saying like, and this is the ultimate orientation, and this is kind of the movement of humanity, and even like all these external forms of power, all of these are just ought to be ordered towards intimate union with God. And so it kind of makes sense that Mary, or the feminine, is lifted to the top. And the church is kind of this ultimate model of what we should be attaining to. And I think that's that's really liberating for women. So
it's a mystery.
yeah.
So what's next on your plate then? I guess you're going to trump up the mountain in September. Do you have plans? Are you guys doing anything? Are you guys taking a break at New Polity for the summer?
No, right now I'm just working on the book with Andrew. I'll be taking a break in September, but nobody else will be. And then I'll come back and Mark and I will do something. We'll see what ends up happening. So we'll be gearing up for another season of the podcast. And it's gonna kind of move more into the second half of his dissertation, which is looking at the biblical narrative. So I guess kind of what we were doing was looking at, okay, what is Judith Butler saying? What is queer theory saying? And then just kind of completely like switching and just looking at the narrative being offered by the Bible. Like what does Revelation have to say about the orientation and meaning of male and female? And I'm really excited about that. I think it'll be really interesting.
There's one thing that he said, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was in the last, I think it was the last episode. He said something about he was very assertive, and you called him out on that or something like that. He used a very particular tone of voice about that the gender confusion is actually the rule, not the exception. Something along the effect that we've always been having a hard time with figuring out gender, and that is actually something that we have to continually be rediscovering or reifying, because if we don't, then it's just going to go into all these other different things, like the pressures. The human imagination is, even though we can't touch it, it's like the light that burns us. Gender is just so powerful. It's so powerful to us. I don't care. I'm really trying to like even say the gender critical feminists. I'm like, no, you can criticize all these different forms, but until you give something positive, you're going to have the queer theorists on the left of you and the conservatives on the right of you. And you're going to always be ceding ground to them and just being anti until you give me something positive. What is a woman?
Yeah.
What is a woman?
Yeah. I think there's kind of two levels of it. There is kind of like the biological like recognition, and I think the confusion about that is a generally new thing.
Yeah, because the tech and the internet, how much time we spend in this.
Yeah. But I think I think that the question that everyone is really grappling with is what does this mean? Like no one, I mean, if it really just came down to biology, nobody would care. Like, sure, you can put whatever name that you want on this appendage, whatever, fine. Yeah, but what does that mean? That is the question. I feel like I mean, that's kind of what we're going to try to explore a little bit more. Like, what is scripture? What is Revelation revealing about what it means to be male and female? And I mean, it's not something that can be exhausted. I mean, I kind of feel like I'm just swimming in a lot. And in some ways, like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I have lots of questions, and I'm like, figuring this out at the same time. And I feel like symbolism in general is just kind of like that, because I think that like the meaning of man and woman is deeply symbolic. And yeah, like you know that it has like a meaning and an orientation, but because there's overlap and because it can be manifested in just like an infinite amount of ways, it can be overwhelming.
One of my aphorisms about it is that sex is universal, gender is local. Gender is and it's taken from Illich. Illich a little bit. It's like you're going to see these local manifestations that are going to be. It's The problem with gender identity is that it tries to make concrete that which is relative or relational, rather.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're going to see is that gender is actually a negotiation towards intimacy that's not going to be able to be affected through a biography on the internet. Your gender identity is a completely... It's not like you're just this actor on a stage that is proclaiming an identity that's gendered. It's that your gender is the movement of men and women and women and men and women figuring out how to discover themselves. So the weird perversion of making gender identity the expression of your authentic self is not some atom that's proclaiming itself like a beacon. It's discovered in this dance of relationship, and gender is the field through which we become de-anonymized. It's the de-anonymizing force in us.
Yeah. I think it's just a lot less fun. I'm starting to see more and more that limits in creativity are just intertwined. Like, you can't have creativity without limits. I mean, everyone knows if you're given an essay prompt of like, talk about whatever you want, that is the most horrible thing you can do to a person.
Well, yeah, but
how do you begin?
I hear that, but at the same time, gender identity tries to, like, there's these really stupid graphics, like where they say that where's your gender identity? Here's Barbie, here's G.I. Joe, and then there's 12 different shapes between it. It's trying to give order in the wrong way. There are things that are not correct rules. It's not correct grammar.
Yes, yeah.
So I do believe in the order, but like there's misordering and there's misinterpretation and there's stupid or lowly interpretation that's going on that is going by the name of gender ideology or gender, and that's not the gender that I'm trying to reify. There's something else that I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. Like, there has to be like humility before the given, like, of your own body, I think, is the starting place. And it's the thing that we're rejecting right now, that like my own body is giving me. It's like revealing to me my own limits so that I can be myself and have an identity. I kind of going back to the image of like architecture, like you have to submit yourself to the laws of physics in order to actually create something beautiful, in order to have an expression of art, I guess. And I think that's the same for men and women. Like, it's an attentiveness to like, what is the meaning that comes from my body? What is the natural orientation that I can learn from my given reality? Like, my natural body is like telling me that like receptivity and fruitfulness is kind of essential to like what I am as a person. And I think if you're being attentive to that spiritually, you'll find that echo also there, and that is going to change the way that you approach other people. And I think that's kind of the baseline that gives shape to the meaning.
It's poetry.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, which is why I'm so lost.
Put a bird on it and call it art. I guess you're right. Just let it be what it is. Maria, it's been wonderful. We should finish the recording. I don't know how long it is because I'm out of town. My setup's completely weird right now. So thank you for your time. Thanks for carving out a place in this weird studio closet.
It's really ugly.
It was wonderful to speak with you, and hope we can speak again.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I've been looking around at some of your other videos, and I really love the content. I just think it's awesome, and I like the way that you interact with all the guests, and you just always struck me as being really sincere, and I feel like that's a rare thing. So thank you.
I'm going to end the recording. Can I ask you, wait, stop. And then,